This is WFYI News Now. It's August 20th, and I'm Abriana Herron. On today's show, school attendance improves for Indiana students. Women's sports leaders gather to talk about the future. And Indianapolis has been courting Major League Soccer officials to net an expansion team in the city. Team ownership, resources, and location are three major criteria for negotiating a deal.
All of those would lead Major League Soccer to say, yes, we will embrace whatever city meets those criteria.
Those stories coming up, but first, IMPD arrested one of their own officers on Monday on 12 counts of child exploitation. All counts are level 4 felonies. Sergeant Javed Richards was taken into custody after an investigation by the Internal Crimes Against Children Unit found evidence of Richards' personal IP address being used to access child pornography. IMPD Chief Chris Bailey expressed shock about the allegations against Richards in a press release. Bailey stated that Richards' alleged actions, quote, constitute a betrayal of the sacred oath we take to protect and serve our community, end quote. Richards was on the force for 12 years and most recently worked in the Internal Affairs Unit. He was suspended from the department Monday, and a recommendation of termination is pending. School attendance is improving for many Indiana students, according to recent state data. From WFYI's Education Desk, Dylan Pierce-McCoy reports the gains come after a surge in absenteeism in the wake of the pandemic.
The number of Indiana children chronically absent last year was about 18%, according to recent data from the state. That's better than the previous school year. It's the second year in a row that Indiana has modestly reduced the number of students who are missing way too much school. Carolyn Gentle-Janety of Butler University is an expert on absenteeism. She says the state's focus on school attendance is paying off.
Schools are doing their part, the state is doing its part, and parents are learning or understanding that their students do better when they're in school.
Indiana schools have used lots of strategies to improve attendance, like regularly notifying parents of how many days their children have missed, and holding attendance conferences with families. I'm Dylan Pierce-McCoy.
Women's sports has seen unprecedented growth recently, with the women's NCAA basketball tournament final drawing an average of about 18.7 million viewers. It was the largest audience in the tournament's history, bigger than the men's March Madness final that recorded an average of 14.8 million viewers. WFYI Samantha Horton reports the surge in interest brought women's sports leaders in Indiana together to talk about the future.
The inaugural Women's Summit hosted by the Indiana Chamber of Commerce and the Indiana Sports Corp recognized the success of women's sports and women working in sports. Indiana Sports Corp Chief Strategy Officer Sarah Meyer says her team's vision for Indianapolis over the next 25 years is to make it the global epicenter for sports. And she says women's sports is a critical piece of that goal.
We have the kind of community where women like us can make things happen. Let's make room at the tables, and let's advocate for others when they can't advocate for themselves, because what we have here is something special. And friends, this is not a moment. This is a movement.
Sessions throughout the day included panels on the economic impact of sports, mental health, and professional development advice. I'm Samantha Horton.
And for our final story today. When Mayor Joe Hogsett announced plans to bring a Major League Soccer team to Indianapolis this spring, there was a lot of excitement and even more questions. What does this mean for Indy 11? Where would the stadium be built? And what are the chances of landing a team? WFYI's Samantha Horton talked with Patrick Rishe, director of the Sports Business Program at Washington University in St. Louis, where MLS recently added a team.
So the teams that are looking to get an MLS expansion, where does the process start? Just walk me through some of the steps there.
Major League Soccer and really any professional sports league, they're going to look at three factors. Who is the ownership group? What kind of resources do they have? What plan do they have in place? And not that it's a must, but are they local?
Indianapolis is looking at with location. They have a spot here in the city that they see as a premium place to have a stadium. I guess, can you talk about, like, does the location of a stadium matter?
Location absolutely matters in any sport, but in particular in Major League Soccer, because Major League Soccer has tried to do their best to make sure that venues are closer to the city, sometimes in downtown, many times in downtown. Part of that is just because the sport, if you look at the demographics of the fan base, does trend younger than most of the other major sports leagues. So because of that, you want to bring people into the city. You want to make it part of the social fabric of the community. One of the problems with all these sports venues that are out in the suburbs and out in the counties across America is maybe you lose that piece of it. You lose the sense of bringing people together. And you could argue probably quite strongly that soccer is the most diverse fan base of all of the sports leagues here in the U.S. It's certainly true globally. If you have a venue plan, and part of that plan is building it in downtown, that's going to appeal quite strongly to Major League Soccer.
In Indianapolis, we already have the Indy 11 and the minor league team. Is it reasonable for both teams to be able to coexist?
That is going to be challenging, to be perfectly honest. Not saying that it can't be done. I have to look more carefully to see if there is an example of that. And in the case of minor league soccer, or USL, United Soccer League, the league that Indy 11 is in, well, in St. Louis, if we use that as a case example, they did have a USL team, and that team went away when the Major League Soccer invited St. Louis to join their league. I think that would be very challenging, not impossible, but challenging.
Well, Indy officials are excited, seeing this as something they're hoping to see happen in the near future. I know MLS officials were a little more on a more cautious approach, it seemed like. So I guess, can you talk about what is the likelihood of the league expanding after San Diego joins as the 30th team next year?
The fact that Indianapolis, to my understanding, is kind of an exclusive negotiating period right now with Major League Soccer, that's usually a pretty good indication that the league is very receptive and moving forward. You just have to finish crossing all the T's and dotting the I's. I don't think that there's not a rush, but there's also not a reason to be slow if all the elements are in place. So if the ownership group is there, if they have a plan for a stadium, location, funding, and if they can prove to Major League Soccer that the support from the fans and the corporate community will be there, then all of those would lead Major League Soccer to say, yes, we will embrace whatever city meets those criteria. I think one of the interesting things that is an intangible that makes Indianapolis attractive is not only the fact that Indianapolis is well known as an event town, but beyond that, you're in such a great regional pocket where you've got Columbus, Cincinnati, Chicago, Nashville, St. Louis. All of these cities are so close and equidistant, roughly, from Indianapolis. So that's really exciting in terms of building these regional rivalries.
Well, Patrick, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate speaking with you.
Thank you.
That's all for today's episode of WFYI News Now. Our podcast is produced by Drew Daudelin, with support from the news team at WFYI and public media journalists across the state. Our news director is Sarah Neal-Estes. Kendall Antron produced our music, and I'm your host, Abriana Herron. If you like today's episode, remember to subscribe and share, and follow WFYI on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube to check in on our newsroom throughout the day. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.